Hey, it's Brad. So, one of my favorite books, movies, whatever, is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And at the end of the movie, they make reference to the second book in the trilogy of four, the restaurant at the end of the universe. And the joke is that it's not at like the far end or some direction, that it's at temporally, chronologically, the end of the universe. Like the Doctor Who episode where he goes to the end of the Earth where it gets destroyed. I think it's one of the earliest, might be second episode of Doctor 9. Anyway, imagine if the end of days refers to an individual's end of days. And like I mentioned before, consciousness, view it as an kind of an aggregate phenomenon where it's kind of emergent of all these little slivers and threads of thought, of little moments of consciousness, and each one serves as kind of an inflection point where you're consciously interacting with reality. Otherwise, it's all deterministic, and you might as well just be reliving memories from your deathbed. But since you do have, like, your thought has some effect on things that then affect your thought subsequently, there's clear evidence that you do interact with the world around you. And mechanisms aside, say you have this aggregate consciousness and you want to sort through what of you is coherent, and specifically what is correctly aligned, whatever else. And you burn away the rest and then regrow in the gaps. Kind of like, again, Star Trek technology, the way they, heal things, and then kind of just make it correct. So imagine if each little moment of consciousness, each thought that you have, each conscious thought essentially is defined by what the thought is, defined by the context it's given, the prompt or whatever, the situation and backstory and scenario, and the subject of the thought, which, think of it as like in mathematical terms, kind of like a big polynomial or a group of functions or wave function, and you can slice it a bunch of different ways, and those are the set of thoughts that you could parse that moment into being. If none of them correctly align, then that thought is not coherent with the rest of them. So it's not something that you remember for long. Similarly, imagine if those thoughts, them resolving, is conscious. Like that thought is conscious itself in its own mode. And when you are experiencing that thought, you are putting yourself in the eyes of that consciousness moment. Words kind of fail on all this stuff, but whatever. That's what language is for, fill in the gaps. So imagine if those moments loop, and So when you can't get something out of your head, it's that moment just looping and trying to resolve, trying to, if it can't, you know, rectify with other moments, then it's like, you know, the data getting stored, this must be atomic. So this active cluster of complexity is as simplified as it can get, or at least that's what it has to believe. Otherwise, it can reduce and um, likely be subsumed in something larger, you know, if it gets separated into terms. Well, in consciousness terms, that's generally known as ego death. It's where what is unique about you, which my 6-year-old daughter is having kind of a identity crisis because she said that she couldn't figure out what was unique about her. And I said, well, nothing is particularly unique to anyone, but every person is a unique combination of the same stuff everyone else is a combination of, or specifically, you know, a subset of those things. Like, if you have a favorite color, there's going to be a subset of the population that has the same favorite color because there's a limited subset of colors that we can see. And I mean, if you get boiled down to your thought in a given moment, the only way that moment can fully encapsulate who you are is if who you are is a very simplistic concept, or it is in alignment with a fractally true and good pattern. So imagine if the process of thought, that process of cognitive dissonance, is the thought resolving itself, and it consciously does so repeatedly in various ways. That's how, you know, dreams, thoughts, whatever. And that's not necessarily, not discounting out of hand, but not necessarily at all saying anything about parallel universes existing in the same physical sense that the real one does. That's a whole different bag of worms. But so say these little thought fibers are trying to self-resolve. That's the way it makes the most sense. And when they are at inflection points, then that's a conscious decision. And in aggregate, you look at all these little fireworks sparks lighting up all over the place. That as a whole is your kind of gestalt thought moment. If those little slivers kept thinking, like say that thought moment persisted, it's just that you're not really in tune with it anymore because you've moved on as a living cluster of thought moments, like a fire just burning forward. But the little trail that you left behind is still burning away. Well, imagine if each moment of you essentially rectifies itself on its own. If that takes all of physical eternity, so be it. That conscious sliver will just spin away as maybe a ghost, energy, whatever. And that which can move on can pass the event horizon. Things that are trapped within temporal reality kind of have trouble with that. And once you're on the other side of that, well, then things kind of get reunified on their own.